Hello everyone, my name is Parmesan and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to talk about this past weekend's Qatar GP, as it's been really talked about this past weekend, this week, but perhaps for the wrong reasons, as multiple drivers suffered health-related issues that, whether it's from dehydration or they're almost fainting, they almost fainted on the racetrack while driving. It was a pretty scary race for the drivers, as they didn't really know what was going to happen. But let's talk about it. For us to understand more about the situation, let's talk about it. Qatar GP, the temperatures for this race, temperatures in the cockpit especially, neared 50 degrees Celsius. And 50 degrees Celsius is about 122 degrees Fahrenheit, which is extremely hot. It's very freaking hot. And obviously in Qatar it was really hot as well. It was around 96 degrees Fahrenheit, 36 degrees Celsius. So it was a hot, humid weekend in general. And that's where maybe Formula 1 or FIA deserve a bit of criticism, because doing a race at Qatar this late in October, where it's really hot in the Middle East, is extremely dangerous for racing. Especially, again, as I mentioned, the temperatures in the cockpit. You combine everything that's in the car that obviously has some heat in it. You combine that with the temperature in Qatar, and you got yourself an ugly combination where it could really hurt plenty of drivers, teams, everyone. And again, it was an ugly race, and obviously the drivers had to, endure with the conditions, plus also maybe during the race perhaps even try quality laps, because again, in this race, FIA, the tire supplier Pirelli, and Formula 1 agreed that for this race, the teams were basically obliged, or they were obligated to do 3 pit stops each 18 laps. So lap 18, 36, and so on, they had to make pit stops because Pirelli didn't know how far the tires would go. So yeah, because perhaps after lap 18, who knows how the tire would fare. It could blow out, big crash could happen, all the above. So combining that with how the track was, temperatures, all the above, it was a tough, physical, demanding race, and potentially it's up there in my opinion for one of the toughest races in Formula 1 history for the drivers. It has to be up there because so many drivers reported issues during the race, with the weather, all the above. Or no, not with the weather, obviously with the conditions, it being hot and humid, but also the heat. The heat was a huge problem. Multiple drivers suffered issues. Let's start listing them. Esteban Ocon, the Frenchman who drives for Alpine, threw up, vomited on lap 15 of 57 during the race. Insane that, think about it. He threw up on lap 15 of 57. That's still a long amount of the race left. That's almost to say a 50 to 20% or 30% of the race, completed. And with the rest, that's still an insane amount left. It's insane. It's terrible. But nonetheless, despite Ocon throwing up on lap 15, he was still able to continue on and finish P7. So, despite that ugly incident, still finished in the top 10, gained good points, fair play to him. Valtteri Bottas, the Finnish driver who races for Alfa Romeo, said it was torture, basically. That it was just torture. With all the heat, it was terrible. Straight up, it was torture, basically. Lance Stroll, the Canadian who races for Aston Martin, immediately went to the ambulance. He got out of his car, walked to the ambulance, basically asking for help because he was feeling terrible. He looked like he was going to faint. And actually, in a video that's around in social media right now, on Twitter, he actually, off-screen, he fainted, heading to the medical center. So, yeah, it was an extremely tough race and an already tough weekend for Lance Stroll, as looked like none went his way, really. In qualifying and the sprint, really none went his way. So, a tough ending to pretty bad, potentially his worst weekend in F1 history. So, yeah, tough race. Alex Albon, the Thai driver who races for Williams, struggled out of his car in a recent video. He completely struggled. And when trying to get out of his car, you could just see the amount of sweat come out of his race suit. It was insane. Like, think about how many calories you could burn, or how many calories actually drivers must have burned during that race at Qatar. It's insane. Like, the amount of sweat, like, it's wild. It's really wild. And even the top 3 drivers had their issues. Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri, who finished first and second at the Qatar GP, could barely stand up into interviews. They looked like they were struggling. So it was pretty odd and pretty eerie to see, that even the top 3 drivers, struggle like that. It's ugly, put it like that, and it shows how much they endured during the race. Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc also confirmed in their post-race interviews that multiple drivers had fainted after the race. Potentially, as I already mentioned, Stroll, the other 2 are still to this day to be known, but like, it's terrifying to know that after the race, and it's the terrifying fact that what could have happened if the drivers, for example, let's say Lance Stroll, had fainted during the race, which at one point during the race, he kind of did. He fell unconscious, but thankfully it was during the straightaway, the long front stretch at the Losail International Circuit, I believe it's called, in Qatar. And luckily, again, that it was during the straight, not in a corner, because it looked like he was leaning to the left, basically like unconscious. So that was scary. It was definitely really scary. And also, Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon, who also, again, drivers for Alpine, were fainting during the high-speed corners. Again, the amount of G-forces the Formula 1 drivers endured, this is like 4 points of G levels, G-forces. Like, it's wild. It's insane how much they fight through with all the G-forces. It's almost like going in a fighter jet, to put it lightly. Logan Sargent, the American driver who races for Williams, had to retire in the middle of the race due to feeling unwell. Earlier in the week, he had reported he was suffering from flu-like symptoms, but nonetheless, he still decided to race. But unfortunately, he had to retire mid-race, as obviously the symptoms were coming back. They were starting to really hurt him. He was really feeling unwell, and unfortunately, he had to retire mid-race. Hopefully, as Dan McCorn, he's having a speedy recovery, so I'm feeling better. But yeah, again, it was definitely scary to see. Even the team radio at times, a bit sad, because he wants to continue. Again, no one really knows right now in Formula 1 right now that if Sargent's going to come back next year or he's going to get replaced. Again, he hasn't had the best year. Lots of crashes in quali. I mean, lots of crashes in the races. He actually spun out and got stuck in the gravel in the F1 sprint on Saturday. So, I mean, he's had a rough showing, but again, in the race that he tried to prove himself, he unfortunately couldn't complete it because he was obviously not feeling well. But again, credit to his entire team for obviously telling him, hey, if you can't complete the race right now, don't worry, your health comes first. You shouldn't feel ashamed to retire if you're not feeling well. So, it says a lot. And again, hopefully Sargent is recovering right now. And also, Lando Norris and George Russell. Lando Norris, British driver who races for McLaren, and George Russell, also a British driver for Mercedes, had to try and get air into their cockpits during the race and even during pit stops. And during the race, it's sketchy because George Russell reported during the race that when he opened his visor to try and get air into his face, it's like he was still getting like hot air. It's almost like using like a dryer that you use to dry your hair, the hot air. And unfortunately came into him, and I mean, it didn't really work, but technically, in a way, it's better than nothing, really. Trying to get some air, like anything at this point during the race, anything right now to get some air, get cool right now. Even extending his hands, like trying to find different ways to cool off. To say like that. Checo Perez, the Mexican driver who races for Red Bull, reported that he could barely see at times during the Qatar GP because it was so like demanding with all the high-speed corners, medium-speed corners, All of the above. It was really physical, demanding. George Russell also reported that his body was tingling and felt like he was going to faint during the last laps of the Qatar GP. Maybe during the race, you can notice potentially he was losing some ground to Charles Leclerc, who I believe was behind him. So maybe that's where, Russell was feeling that his body was tingling, that he was going to faint. Lando Norris, a driver from McLaren, said also his vision was consistently going in and out of focus. He was losing focus, thus at times affecting his performance in the race. And that's scary because you could potentially end up spinning out if you're completely out of focus during the race. So it's really tough. Charles Leclerc also mentioned the same thing. Charles Leclerc, by the way, a Monegasque driver who races for Ferrari, was losing vision towards the end. He was feeling unwell. The heat was starting to truly get into him. Rather, the heat got to everyone. So, tough, demanding race. And for Leclerc, everyone, in my opinion, except for Lewis Hamilton, Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz, who didn't start the race because he had a fuel leak issue and unfortunately couldn't continue. Lewis Hamilton, who collided with his teammate George Russell at the beginning of the race. So, maybe those two got lucky that they didn't have to go through those tough conditions, but nonetheless, it's not the result they wanted or need right now in the World Drivers' Championship. So they look to bounce back next weekend at Qatar, Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas. And yeah, all of the drivers again had to go to the medical center. Lance Stroll needed an IB, so yeah, a really tough, demanding race at Qatar GP. And it makes us really all wonder as fans of the sport, the FIA, what do we need to do? This question more goes to the FIA. What do we need to do to avoid this happening? In my opinion, move the race to later. For example, around November and December, in my opinion, the conditions are way more cooler. Race it there. Easy. Because racing in October in the Middle East is extremely hot, grueling, humid. It's terrible. It's like to potentially in line or put in line what the Formula 1 drivers endured. I want to mention a previous experience that I went through. I was racing go-karts here in hometown Florida, and I was racing with a bit of a headache. It was a headache that was still hurting me a bit. I decided to still race. The heat combined with that headache was terrible. And trying to get air at times to my face, it's just hot air. It's really bad, especially for even to like compare with Sargent. You're not feeling well during the race. It is really hard to race if you're not feeling well. It's horrible. You feel like you're gonna throw up. You feel your head about to explode. It's terrible. That's what I endured when I was doing go-kart racing here in Florida one time when I had a headache. It was terrible. I had to retire mid-race because obviously, same as Sargent, I wasn't feeling well. I was feeling terrible. So, tough situations. And again, as mentioned by George Russell, he told Sky Sports after the race that, again, temperatures in the cockpit neared 50 degrees Celsius, 122 degrees Fahrenheit, at the Lusail International Circuit. It was just insanely demanding. Also, Pirelli, the tire supplier for Formula 1, said that the track temperatures did not drop, not even below 36 degrees Celsius, 96.8 degrees Fahrenheit, during the night race. That's insane. By combining the hot, humid weather of Qatar plus the track temperatures, that's insane. Insanely grueling, insanely tough, and insanely challenging for all the F1 drivers. It was a super tough race. Again, one of the toughest races in F1 history. Everyone had issues with heat that they could barely see. They were out of focus. It was tough. Hopefully, Formula 1 FIA makes some decisions perhaps inside the cars in the cockpits or schedule changes for next season, because potentially this race could have been worse. Because again, what if a driver fainted during corners? What if a driver completely fainted during the race, perhaps on the straight? Like, a lot of what ifs. Thankfully none of those happened. But yeah, tough, grueling race at Qatar, which in my opinion, from what I've seen so far of F1, easily the toughest race in the modern era for Formula 1, as literally every single driver struggled. I think everyone. I never saw anything reported by Guan Yu Zhou that if he was suffering with heat problems or anything. Maybe he did. But yeah. As for the top 10, It was Verstappen, Piastri, Norris, Russell, Leclerc, Fernando Alonso, Esteban Ocon, Valtteri Bottas, Zhou Guanyu, and Sergio Perez. Well, there have been rumors circulating that Perez could be retiring or announcing his retirement at the Mexican Grand Prix, but those rumors have died immediately. So, yeah, quick little news. But that's it for my video today. Thank you all for watching. I don't really know if I'll be able to make videos this weekend, as I'll be working this weekend. I have a job, so it's going to be tough, but I'll try my best. But nonetheless, thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Bye-bye.